Welcome back to the Great American Movie Review, where we review great American movies.
My name is Kyle.
And I'm Mikiah. This is a Movie of the Week style podcast where we take turns picking films and we have a casual discussion about their context and quality. This week was my turn to pick, and I have selected the 2013 independent film Short Term 12. This is primarily an audio show, so if you like listening to us in an audio format, you can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So be sure to check us out, give us a like and a follow there. But yeah, Short Term 12 is a film about Grace, played by Brie Larson, and she and some other people, they run a short-term living facility basically for kids who are at risk. They don't really have a safe place to live consistently, so they either spend all of their time or a lot of their time, like throughout the week, maybe on weekends going with parents, at this facility with these counselors, basically is what they are. And yeah, it's just kind of living in that, experience for about the exact amount of time. It's about a week.
I'd say that's fair. And it mostly just focuses on the jobs that people do for decades, but it's just taking a look at, like you said, probably a week in the life of this unit, I guess.
Yeah, this particular unit. And so the film, directed by Destin Daniel Cretton, received acclaim at festivals in 2013, even winning the Grand Jury Prize for Best Narrative Feature at the South by Southwest Film Festival, where it premiered. It was adapted from Cretton's own award-winning 2008 short film of the same name. While it was not a financial hit, only ever making $1.6 million worldwide, it only cost $400,000 to make, so it's a very limited budget, so it didn't need to make a ton to be technically successful, but it still wasn't a big hit. Not a lot of people really saw this in theaters at all, except for you, apparently.
Yeah, so last week I had said that I haven't seen this movie, and I swear that was true, and when he brought up the movie Short Term 12, I had no idea what it was. But so I saw this movie in the theaters, and I completely forgot it existed. So
yeah, that seems to be the case for everybody, though. Like this movie is kind of significant in just the cast alone, and it really is kind of a launching pad for a lot of these people in the film. And the director too, Destin Daniel Cretton, he's gone on to do some bigger things. I mean, he directed a couple other, not quite indie, a little bit bigger than indie, with like The Glass House and Just Mercy. And then he did Shang-Chi, and then he was the one scheduled to do the Kang Dynasty, but now that's all up in limbo. So he's still going to be working on Shang-Chi 2 in the MCU. It's just kind of interesting. Like, this is kind of what sent him there, though.
Yeah, this might be hindsight, but it feels like Rami Malek was the most well-known at the time, being in the Night at the Museum movies, and that's
right.
about it. Because I don't think Brie Larson had been in very much prior, aside from like Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Okay, Brie Larson's been acting. She was a child actress. She was in a Disney Channel original movie. She's in a few things as a kid. She continued working
like mainstream,
right? Then she had like Scott Pilgrim, like you said, very supporting role there, which she's great in. But yeah, once again, very supporting still, like small role.
Well, Scott Pilgrim is definitely an ensemble film when it comes to those supporting roles.
Right.
Feels like Edgar Wright really got everybody that he probably could have gotten. That absolutely. I mean, that movie introduced a lot of names to people like Anna Kendrick, Aubrey Plaza. And I mean, Michael Cera was already a hometown name for millennials at the time. But yeah, those Mary Elizabeth Winstead, every single actor who comes from that movie either made it big or has made it big since. So it's a very weird ensemble.
Yeah, but this movie definitely for Brie Larson, her being in other things before this is what kind of pushed her. Apparently, when Lenny Abrahamson was making the movie Room, it was this performance that got her that role, and then that role
sense.
Got her an Oscar, and now she kind of has a pick of whatever she wants to do. But this movie gets kind of left behind. Like, it got acclaim in the year it came out, but it didn't quite hit the awards festival kind of side of things. It kind of hit the festival circuits, like Sundance and South by Southwest. I mean, the original short film won a prize for at Sundance when that came out back in 2008, 2009. So
yeah, this movie is the epitome of festival darling, but
yes,
it's very niche and niche enough to where nobody's going to see it.
Yeah, it's super indie. It's indie in every conceivable way from its production. Like I said, $400,000. Sounds like a big amount of money to somebody who has never considered what it costs to make a film, but for what it costs to make a film, that is dirt cheap. So,
but it's also a small scope.
Yes.
Mostly because of the budget, but mostly because of the story it's telling.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I love. This kind of independent filmmaking is the kind of filmmaking that I really just live for, though. It is my goal in life to be able to somewhat regularly be able to attend the Sundance Film Festival and just see a bunch of indie films that I've never heard of from people that I don't know, and just kind of go in blind and watch something that could completely blow you away. It could be disappointing. It could be awful, but it's probably at least decent, and something that you've not seen before necessarily. Or at least it's an interesting look at something, on a smaller, more intimate scale. And
I would say that's what this is. I don't think it's avant-garde in the way that you would think.
No.
It's definitely not treading new ground on any of its messages or themes.
No.
But it is a very interesting, small-scale look at something that's been tread over countless times.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just kind of, that's where, so my general feelings on this film, I hadn't watched it. I either saw it in 2013 or I saw it in 2014 sometime. I don't know, but it's been about 10 years since I've seen it either way. And I haven't watched it since then.
You love this movie and you don't even know when you saw it. I don't know when I saw this. Well, I think I remember it in the theaters.
But it's kind of this thing where I remembered this movie having a very strong impact on me that year. Like it was something I was trying to get other people to see and stuff like that. But I didn't, over the years, it's been kind of left behind in a lot of ways. Like it's not been brought up nearly as much as I think that the movie deserves based on how I felt about it from the time when I originally watched it. But like I said, I haven't even watched it since then. So it was kind of neat watching it again and me really realizing why it had such an impact on me and still kind of does. And I'll get into that more as we talk about it more in depth. But I do like watching it again. I love this film. Like this is that tender-hearted kind of independent filmmaking, just really just intimate and personal, and it's just like the whole heart's on the screen, and it's not shying away from ugly details, but it's not, it's just, I don't know. This is the kind of film that I really just go all in for. And so, I'm really happy that I revisited it. I found the Blu-ray at a Dollar General next to the theater or a Dollar Tree next to the theater that I regularly attend.
Okay, don't break your own arm tooting your own horn there.
No,
I'm so glad that I brought this up. This is me talking about a movie that I love.
No, I'm just saying, I'm just happy that, I happened to find this again, I wasn't looking for it again.
That's how people find it. They just suddenly remember it exists.
Or find it at a Dollar Tree. So, but what did you think about it, revisiting it?
It's kind of weird forgetting a movie and then knowing exactly how the plot goes.
Right.
While rewatching it and just remembering everything about it. I'll say this. It's odd. I'm very apathetic towards this kind of movie making because it doesn't appeal to me. I can appreciate it, but it just doesn't appeal to me. It's the same reason why I don't go out of my way to watch coming of age movies, because it just doesn't appeal to me. It's not really what I want to visit when I go to the movie theater. So watching a movie like this, I recognize it's good, but it's just not for me.
I understand.
What I will say is the thing I feel most strongly about is the acting. It's great from everyone in it.
Absolutely.
And the shaky cam is garbage. I hate it so much.
It's just a handheld cam. That's common in indie filmmaking because it's cheaper.
I know, but they purposefully shook the camera to get some sort of discomfort out of the audience, I guess, or to make it seem more independent than it actually is, because $400,000, you don't need handheld camera like that. I know it's a small amount of money, but you don't need a handheld camera like that. It was a choice to do that.
It was a choice. It was a choice that I think paid off completely because it
absolutely
it's
not
all about the intimacy of getting in close with these people, these characters, and
you don't have to shake the camera every 0.3 of a second in order to do that.
The camera
shows because the camera shakes stop at a certain point.
I don't know. The camera shakes never felt unnatural to me. It was just like in the moment, you know, like, I don't know. I was never once during this movie taken out by any type of camera motion. In fact, I was only more invested in it based on the filmmaking and the techniques they used. So I think we just fundamentally disagree on that aspect of it.
When I see movies like this, I think like a still camera that doesn't pan, that doesn't do anything. It just stays in the moment. And there are moments where like Grace and Jaden are having a moment and it just pulls out and shows them both on the screen. Those kind of shots without the shaky cam would have hit more, wouldn't it? Because it's like the stillness of just the environment that they're in.
I mean, it comes down to the choice of it. And I really think that up close, there's a lot of close up in this film.
I don't mind the close up, but do you honestly think that shaky cam, instead of just keeping the camera a little bit more still, or choosing shaky cam?
I mean, I fundamentally
moments.
I fundamentally disagree with even the term shaky cam for this movie. It's just handheld because it's not like horribly shaky. It's not like a horrible like action film from the 2000, like the late 2000s, early 2010s, where they just like are trying to hide what they're filming and just literally shaking the camera around. That's what I think of shaky cam as. This is just handheld cinematography, and they're not trying to keep it the steadiest in the world, but I don't know. This is just, I just fundamentally disagree. I think that the up close and personal is really effective. I think the handheld
don't have a problem with the up close and personal, right? But you don't.
I think the handheld camera. I think the handheld camera keeps you there with the characters. You know, like I don't feel distanced from it.
It didn't do that for me.
It doesn't like. I don't know. There's been a couple of films that I've watched recently where I wish there was some more intimate camera like choices, because sometimes the stillness can be cold, and that can be an intentional thing. But in a film like this, I want to feel like I'm present, you know, and I really do feel like I'm present in this environment with these people, because it's really trying to get you emotionally invested in what's going on here, and that really works for me here. So I think, I don't know, I really enjoyed the filmmaking side of this, but yeah, I think we're just gonna have to agree to disagree on that one.
It's as simple as that. The cinematography is the low point for me. So
yeah, I mean, I still think, like, even if that's the low point, there's a lot of great stuff in here, independent of the way it looks. But yeah, this is, like I said, truly just like, this is an independent feature in its presentation. The cast at the time, like we talked about, relative unknowns, you know, people like Rami Malek and Brie Larson had appeared in things, but, you know, and John Gallagher Jr. had also popped up in some things, but he's continued to work steadily, not as prominently as Rami Malek and Brie Larson, but even people like Stephanie Beatriz in here. She's been she had a consistent role in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which she was great in, and she's continued to do some interesting voice work. She was in Encanto as the main character there. So yeah, like and even what's the little girl who plays Jaden, that actress,
Caitlin Dever.
Yeah, Caitlin Dever or Dever. I don't know how to say it. Either way, she's been like
probably Dever.
She's been absolutely blowing up right now with she had the movie Booksmart, which got her a lot of attention, and then she had this really interesting sci-fi movie that came out on Hulu, of all things, earlier. This little alien invasion movie, No One Will Save You, which I really enjoyed that movie. It has a weird ending, but I kind of dig it. And she just got cast as one of the major characters in the upcoming season of HBO's The Last of Us show. So she's kind of really on this upward trajectory now too. And of course, I think maybe the most significant person to come out of this is Lakeith Stanfield, because Lakeith Stanfield was in the original short film, which was his first piece of acting. And then apparently he quit acting entirely. And by the time that Cretton made this film, which I think that he did the right thing, he made another film as his first feature film, and then he took his short film and adapted it here. Because when you're making a short film like that, because that was his thesis film in college, it's definitely going to be a more personal thing. And then when you're actually adapting it, I think it's good to have a little bit of, learning process happen in something else that maybe isn't quite as personal. And then to come through once you kind of understand what you're actually going into making a feature film, to make the more personal thing there. So I think he took the right steps to make sure that this is as good as it is. But yeah, Lakeith, when he tried to reach out to Lakeith Stanfield to bring him back for this one, he's the only actor that's in both the short and the feature.
I did try to watch the short film.
Yeah.
I couldn't get my hands on it anywhere.
Yeah.
So
I had it on the Blu-ray.
I assume you've seen it.
Yeah, I had it on the Blu-ray, so I've seen the short film. But yeah, apparently Lakeith Stanfield had quit acting and he didn't have a phone. So it was like hard to find him and like track him down. But he did. And
that was just young people in the late 2000s.
Yeah, and now Lakeith Stanfield's an Oscar-nominated actor. He's appeared in so many films. He's so good in everything that he's in. Atlanta.
I think his name was Andre in Get Out. He was basically the catalyst that brought Daniel
Kaluuya.
Daniel Kaluuya's character into the Residence.
He's in Knives Out, and he might be my favorite character in Atlanta, which is a show full of great characters. So
I couldn't remember him from the first season, which I think he was in, but I only have seen the first season because I don't know, I couldn't find it anywhere outside of the streaming services that I didn't want to pay for. So
right, I understand that.
I have yet to see the new seasons of it, but I really like the first season.
Yeah,
so
I mean, the show's
watch it
fantastic.
Eventually.
It's a great show. It had also weird breaks where like Donald Glover is a very busy person.
The first season was like in 2015, and then like the second season was like 3 years after.
The whole cast became very busy with everything. So like there were sometimes a year or two break in between seasons. So, but yeah, great show if you haven't watched it. But yeah, like this kind of being his like literal debut, that's like a big thing just for this movie period. Like, because he's had such a like interesting career and he's such a great actor that I don't know. I love that this is kind of where he got his start.
And he's been kind of in everything since. So good for him, because he is one of my favorite actors in this one.
Yeah, because he's playing a character named Marcus. Like I said, Grace is the Brie Larson character, and you get allusions to this early on, but then you do figure out definitively what has happened to her character in the past. But she's had some past trauma, and specifically childhood trauma, and she's dealing with a pregnancy, and that with John Gallagher Jr., who they're in a relationship, and also
unplanned pregnancy.
An unplanned pregnancy, yeah. And so she's dealing with these at-risk kids all the time, and so she's having to consider like everything about her life in this moment of time. This kind of week, she's really thinking a lot about her life and things that have gone on, and if she wants to be a mother. On top of that, you do have all these other characters like John Gallagher Jr., her boyfriend / co-counselor with her. You have Rami Malek, who's just coming into it as somebody who comes from a place of some relative privilege here, because he doesn't there's a couple of funny things with them.
No, I think there just generally is a stigma between at-risk children, especially in foster care. So
right.
It's not necessarily he's privileged. It's just that he's outside the system.
Right. He doesn't know the system, and he says a couple of things that
he says the quiet parts out loud.
Right. Like he's like, I always wanted to work with troubled
underprivileged
kids,
children,
underprivileged children is what he says. It's like, who says we're underprivileged is what Marcus says to him. So Marcus is like the oldest kid at this place. He's about to turn 18, and since it is it is a facility for
it's a care
children,
for minors.
Yeah, for minors. Once you turn 18, you can't really stay there anymore. So he graduates out of it. So it's kind of his last week. On top of that is the other thing happening. And then you also get this new girl who's coming in, Jaden, the Caitlin Dever character. And she has a cutting issue, and she has her father's not very present, and she stays with him on weekends, but she's there for the weekdays, and she's like really, so you get somebody being added to the mix, you get somebody who's on their way out, and then you have these counselor characters.
Yeah, it felt like Rami Malek's character Nate was supposed to be like the grounded guy, especially because he's the guy coming in. We're introduced to him while we're introduced to the movie, so he's like the guy that you feed exposition to. But then he just kind of drops off, and he's around, but he's not really doing anything.
Yeah, he's like
the movie is much more focused on Grace and Mason's characters.
Right, those are that whole thing there, and because you do get a lot of time both at the facility and then with Grace at home. She goes to an abortion clinic before she tells Mason that she's pregnant to schedule an appointment. You find out, which I picked this movie to get away from some of the heaviness of Chinatown. Little did I remember that it deals with some of the exact same stuff.
not only that, but like I see a lot of people saying that this is a heartwarming film, but even when I watched this movie the first time, this was not a heartwarming film for me.
I do think
some
that
points
this is
are
a
heartwarming, but this is a very, very tough movie.
It has very challenging aspects, but I also think that it comes through in a way that is refinding your humanity, like finding your strength, is kind of what the movie ends on. There are deleted scenes in here that were taken out.
There's a whole 30 minutes to an hour, I think, cut from the final cut to
which is uncommon
for the film.
Yeah, that's very uncommon for like an independent film like this to have that much deleted footage. But he really wanted the tone to not be too weighed down by everything. He wanted to strike that balance, and I think he really succeeds at that, and getting that 90-minute runtime too. It never feels like it's overstaying its welcome with anything that it's presenting either. So yeah, I think that was a smart decision to kind of cut back, especially having watched some of those scenes. I think that like those were good cuts, because that's one of the hardest thing to do as a director, I think, is going through and taking this thing that you spent so much time and effort on, and then having to say, I need to take out this and I need to take out that, because it makes it a better film if this isn't in there. So
I agree, it's one of the harder things to do, but oddly enough, cutting things out that are unimportant or redundant, especially in writing, is one of the most important things you can do to improve your writing.
100%.
So it's funny that the thought process for it is mostly, I don't want to cut this out. I don't want to cut this out. When cutting it out is probably, if it doesn't affect too much, probably going to be much better for the film. Right.
I mean, that's why unless you're the Coen brothers or Alfonso Cuarón, you're not editing your own films, because most people don't have that kind of restraint, to be able to be like, yeah, I'm just going to lop this whole thing out.
That like really impartiality.
Right.
Impartiality?
Right.
I don't even know if that's a word, but the impartial nature of like having somebody else proofread or edit your film is important.
Right.
And that's why most of like you said, only a handful of directors don't do that.
Right. So yeah, you find out, so tying it into the whole Chinatown thing that I thought I was avoiding with this, but I totally forgot about when I picked it.
Yeah, it's not a tragic ending, but man, is it close to being a tragic ending.
It's honestly kind of nice watching it after Chinatown, because you do get...
Well, no, hold on. Chinatown is one of the most tragic endings. It's like one of the most unfortunate, like everything went wrong in a way that like it just shouldn't have gone wrong, but it did. This
doesn't give you reconciliation for like that kind of feeling from Chinatown, but it does give you the person coming through it, like they're coming through to the other side of it. The person who in the situation was a victim doesn't just get shot dead in the streets, they get to come through, they get to have good relationships. I love the relationship that she has with Mason in this movie. Very tenderhearted, but he also comes from a difficult place. He was a foster kid. You do get that scene with him and his foster family at that party, which is a really touching scene.
Yeah, I think John Gallagher Jr. said I think it was an interview or maybe a sit down, that he didn't like the character as he was reading the script until the second half twist of the family that he comes from and his upbringing, and then it all just like clicks, where of course he's good with children, and of course he's like a very tender person because of the way that he's grown up.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And like you even get little hints of it too early on because he speaks Spanish and it's like, okay, it could just be a guy speaking Spanish. But then you find out that it was like a Spanish speaking family that was his foster parents. So
Yeah.
like that the it all bleeds into itself. Like life experience comes out of a lot of how he was raised and the upbringing and the fact that he had that family that clearly cared so much for him and all of his other foster siblings that yeah, that he was able to get to the place where he's at because he's a very tender character, you know, and but he's also very human, you know. I love the scene. So when Grace tells him that that she's pregnant, and he just kind of gets up and
Basically
walks
goes
away.
through the 5 stages of grief.
Right. Well, he just like runs through it. You know, he doesn't have like the perfect response, but he has a response that is just like there's surprise. There's just like I have to like think about my whole life is changing now, like because of this. You know, it's all different. And then
well, it's like a computer rebooting. The whole point is
right.
This is a situation that like we navigate our life in such a way where situations like these change your life completely and entirely, and it's a big maneuver. So
right,
a lot of people have that kind of like, oh, you have to say, oh my gosh, yes, like immediately.
yeah.
But if it's not something that somebody's been thinking about as like this is a possibility thing, then yeah, that's kind of tough to hear for the first few seconds,
right,
as you're remembering we live in this situation. We need to figure out a way to maneuver around this in a way where it doesn't fall apart for us, especially the situation that they're in.
Yeah, and it's all about when he gets through his reboot and when he comes back in the room and he sits down with her and they are like figuring it out, you know, like he's clearly very patient and but still, you know, he has his reactions and the movie lets him have reactions that are very human reactions and responses. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that. But yeah, Grace's character, she was also a cutter. You get to, and somewhere in the middle of the
around
movie,
her ankles, I believe.
yes, you get to see her scars for that when she shows it to in a point where she's trying to relate to Jaden. And you also get information about why pregnancy specifically is so hard for her. It's because she was pregnant once in the past, which you get that information early on, but you get later on in the film that is because her father was abusive and raped her. So it's very rough.
Yeah, you
obviously.
went from Chinatown and picked the exact same type of topic.
I didn't realize. Like I said, it's been like 10 years. I didn't remember the exact like. Content
you were watching Chinatown. My sister, my daughter, my sister. This is exactly like Short Term 12.
but yeah, like I said, this movie really you do get because by the end of the film, you know, you get her deciding that she is keeping the kid, you know, and they're gonna do this and they're gonna do it on their terms, you know, and they're gonna do it like just because she was raised in that environment and just because she's seen so many other kids raised in that environment, you know, she's not going to repeat the errors of her parents.
The only reason she's not in that same kind of situation as the kids there is because one, she's older, and two, she's more matured.
Yeah.
So she's matured out of it.
Yeah, because there's also a whole thing where she's talking about her mom. And she's talking about how her mom would have all of these horrible boyfriends over. And she would create portraits of them and she'd have them sit. And she said, I hated these guys. They were horrible men. But I would sit with them and drag out the portrait process for as long as possible. And she's like, I don't really know why I did that. And then the Jaden character says, basically, like, maybe you did that so that they wouldn't be with your mom. You know, you're protecting your mom. But then I think she says what, her mom died.
Yeah.
Yeah, she doesn't really have that parental figure in her life anymore. And clearly that was a complicated relationship itself, you know? So yeah, it is heavy subject matter for sure. But I think that the movie finds a light in all of this stuff. That's kind of the point here, is what I see it as.
Yeah, and Destin Daniel Cretton did say that one of his first jobs was something akin to this, social work for at-risk teens. So having that experience and like it's just another day on the job for most of these people, especially the people working there, and especially people working, like, we'll call it in the field. But like for the kids, it's everything, and for the situation at hand, like, it's just for people with either broken homes or people who have no homes. So it's an unfortunate thing that needs to happen, but it's still unfortunate.
Right. And the short film specifically just takes place over one day. The main character it's not like the exact same main character. It's a guy, and you get a lot of the exact scenes from this movie that are present are from the original short film, just done better, honestly, in the feature. The short film's pretty rough around the edges. It feels a bit like a student film for sure, but it's still well done.
Yeah, that intro and outro especially, were those essentially shot-for-shot recreations? Because it feels like the way that you start and end, like, a day in the life is kind of the exact same thing. Or was that new?
That was new. Like, you had something kind of like that at the beginning of the short film, but it wasn't. I love the way that this movie opens and closes, like that kind of the bookends here, because you get John Gallagher Jr.'s character, Mason, is just telling this story. And it's like, this is where like his performance is really great. Just right off the bat, because you get really invested in the way he's telling this story, and it just feels like some guy that, that's kind of charismatic, and he tells his stories well, but
coming from a foster family where he doesn't really speak the language, you kind of have to get some charisma out of it in order to keep up.
Right. And but he's telling this story, this humorous story about this kid, and it also explains kind of the setting too. It lays the groundwork for the film really well and where they're at, because he's talking about how if a kid leaves the grounds of, the facility, they can't be touched, but you can. So what they're instructed to do is you follow that kid and try to really convince them to come back, not with any touching them at all. But apparently he had some like tacos, and he was there. He hadn't been working at this place very long, and he didn't know that apparently those tacos, like, straight up diarrhea is what you're going to get after eating those. And so he's following this guy for like a long time who's left. And when the guy finally, he's confronted by him on this bus, he's like, I gotta get off because I gotta go to the bathroom. And the guy told him, don't get off or I'll like knock you out or something like that. And then he said that when he was getting up, he just pooped his pants. And the guy laughed so hard about it that he had to go. He went back with him just so he could tell everybody about that he pooped his pants. And that's
basically what I gather from that scene is the same thing that I would gather from the type of jobs that I've worked at, where it's shooting the shit because you are letting out some stress.
Right.
So
it's a very stressful job,
especially the kind of job that they have. So it's also introducing Rami Malek's character to like the kind of situation that you would expect. Right. I kind of gathered the fact that Mason probably exaggerated a little bit of that, as people are wont to do for stories that they're telling of things that have happened. But it's proving to the people that matter that, by the way, this job it's absurd, but it's got some payoffs. Right.
And it also then highlights kind of, because then it immediately addresses what happened to that same guy after the fact. And he didn't have a happy ending.
No.
Not from that event, but just later on, he ran away again, and then he ended up dying.
And it's the parallel where I think the outro, the outro story is talking about Marcus. So
yes. And then you get the outro story. Once again, the movie kind of coming through, finding the light in it, where Marcus has now left the facility, and he sees him out on a date with this girl that he had a crush on when she was also at the facility. And it's this very nice, lighthearted story that doesn't have like the same kind of negative thing that ultimately happened from the first story. So it's a nice bookend, a nice parallel. It's a nice way to close this film. And yeah, I really just love that aspect of it. But yeah, the short film just opens with not the story, but just kind of describing to the new person what goes on, basically. So it's a little bit less artistically done in terms of, you know, having a nice.
I might watch it eventually, but only if it like becomes readily available anywhere. So right, probably not.
Yeah, but yeah. When I was watching this, I'll get into some personal stuff now. I didn't realize. Once again, I forgot some of the subject matter stuff here. So, but watching it again, I realized why it was so significant to me. And I didn't grow up in a household that was bad, you know, like my parents are not abusive. I didn't have any of that stuff, but I was extremely depressed in middle school and high school and even through college as well. But, and I have self-harm tendencies, not cutting, but I definitely, you know, I have self-harm tendencies, and watching this.
Do you have a tendency to wrap a American flag around you at all times?
I don't. You know what? That's something that I don't have a tendency to do.
You know what? Maybe that would help.
Maybe if I just felt a little bit more American pride.
Wow, what was the kid's name? Was it Tom? I think it was Tom.
The kid,
yeah, the kid who is the subject. Yeah, the kid who is the subject of the intro and outro.
Yeah,
because he's the guy wrapping around a.
Because he tries to run away, and they always have to catch him. Yeah.
No, but continue. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah. No, you're good. Yeah. So I have self-harm tendencies, and so watching a movie like this, and kind of that's where it's like that heartfelt, like heartwarming quality to this film. This film, I remember when I watched it for the first time, it really broke me, you know, like it broke me down to where I needed to be at the time. This was an extremely affecting movie for me. And I had forgotten exactly why until rewatching it. And it just kind of put me back in that headspace of when I watched it for the first time. And yeah, it's just kind of, it was really important for me to see that these people, like how other people are dealing with these things, and how also they're able to come through the other side of that. And yeah, it's just a lot of catharsis for me in watching it the first time, and then also still watching it again. So that's just a little personal aside, but I do have, I guess, a more personal stake in this movie than I even realized than that I did upon going back to it.
Unfortunately, on my side, I just don't really connect that emotionally with movies the same way that you do. So
yeah, I understand.
It's just one of those things. I have a tendency to for some movies, but not really movies like this. So
yeah. I mean, it's to each their own. Everybody's going to have their own things that they connect with in different ways. And, you know, you could make a film that's objectively, in terms of filmmaking, the best film that's ever been made, you know. But there's no real way to determine that, and somebody is still going to hate that movie, you know? And you don't even hate this, but I'm just saying, like, on the grand, like, paradigm of everything, you know, like, I'm really high on this movie. This movie, I think, is incredible. But I understand where it might not connect as much with somebody else, and that's totally fine. That's just the way art is subjective. So,
yeah, I'd say, getting more into that kind of discussion, it would be what is the intent of the filmmaker and what is the intent of the audience to be from the filmmaker and to the audience. So as an example, I would say, I cannot remember who wrote the Twilight series, but obviously when she wrote those books, yeah, she did what she wanted. She wrote down exactly what she wanted to write, and her target audience, which was very obviously young adult girls, teenage to like 20, really went bonkers for that series. Yeah. So in a way, those are kind of in the objective framework of those books were written for a specific audience, which was received well by that audience. Those are objectively written well.
Yeah.
For that audience. So it's that kind of thing. If the target audience of this movie is what it is, and I suspect it is, like your case, I would say would be the target audience for that, or somebody who is going through that kind of situation, or somebody who is interested in that kind of social work. I could see this movie being very good in their eyes. So
Yeah.
I'd say it's pretty well developed for what it's going for.
I think the movie, depending, like, this one, I think is affecting enough that if, the right person watched it, this could be kind of a life-changing thing for them, like change a trajectory, give them a different perspective on things. And while I'm not going to say it's necessarily fully life-changing, it did give me catharsis that I absolutely needed at the point in time where I watched this the first time, just for my life and just where I was at. So
from what I've read, and I've never visited a unit like this, but I visited similar situations, and it's pretty realistic.
Yeah.
The kind of, maybe not the dialogue necessarily, but the topic of the dialogue is on point. So yeah, I'd say what it's going for, it does well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, anything else you want to talk about with the movie as a whole?
No, I got nothing.
Yeah, I feel like we have a little bit more to discuss around the topics of the scoring for this one.
Almost certainly.
Yeah, than usual, because there's other things that I know to talk about, but I feel like those would be relevant whenever we're talking about that. So if you want to move into scoring, we can go ahead and do that.
Yeah, we haven't really talked about the like movie plot wise or that much.
Right.
It's mostly been just things surrounding it, which is typically what we do. So
yeah. That's really
it's just a different discussion.
Yeah. But yeah, we'll talk more about the movie when we're actually talking about scoring. So let's just move into that then.
Sure.
Yeah. So how we do it on our show is same as we always do it. We do 0 to 2 across 10 categories, 0 being not good, 1 being good, 2 being great. We keep it pretty broad because that's just the way we like it. It's more of an outline of a of a scoring system than anything, but that's how we do it, and it gives us something to talk about. So as usual, our first category is writing.
This is one I don't feel very strongly about. There's only a few categories that, oddly enough, writing is usually my most strongly thought about topic, but given the simple nature of the plot and given the heartfelt dialogue and themes, I think they're well interpreted. I don't know if it's great.
I think it's great. I personally do think the writing is really strong, both in how the film lays itself out structurally. Like you said, the plot is simple, but the plot is not the plot. The plot is the characters. The characters are the plots. And I think these characters are incredibly well written. And well developed. And I think that the journey of Grace in coming to terms with her pregnancy, kind of being the core of, I guess, what you would call the story here, works really well because that character focused aspect of that. And you get her later on in the film when she's realizing that the Jaden character's father is abusive, and the way that Jaden is able to communicate to her that information without ever explicitly saying it, that whole story that she tells through the octopus and the shark. And that whole scene is heartbreaking. And the way that she's able to talk without talking and relay that information, Grace's passion for all of that, the way that she confronts the guy who runs the place, and then she goes on and she takes it a step too far and she breaks into Jaden's house and is standing at her dad with the bat. And the movie earns it though, because you really get the sense of this specific trauma as it's kind of revealed more and more about her, and to see that that's exact same thing that happened to her is happening to somebody else, and her having that response. But then you get this lovely moment where Jaden just kind of takes her down from it, and says, that's kind of extreme, isn't it, basically? And then instead of bashing in Jaden's dad's head, they bash in the car, which is probably the most expensive thing in the movie, to bust a bunch of car windows with the bat.
That's probably fair.
But that's a very satisfying scene, just getting that through line and kind of resolving it with that kind of outburst, because sometimes you do need that physical outburst, you need that kind of moment of catharsis. So I'll
agree, but I think that's more so towards character writing as well as acting.
Right, but like we said, the story, the plot really is the characters here. They're a little bit more tied together than, you know, a lot of other films might be. And I think that the writing for the characters and the way that the character, specifically I'm talking about here, the way that the characters are communicating with each other, and are able to communicate with each other, I think is really tremendously done. And this kind of character writing, I don't want to get overlooked because I really think that it's fantastic.
All right. As I said, I don't feel strongly, so I'll move with you towards it too.
Okay. World building. Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty limited setting. But within that setting, you really get a full understanding of the operations, I'd say. But how do you feel about the world building?
I'd say the operations, but probably not the structure. Like there's the, what is his name? The head honcho guy. Yeah. I have no idea what he's doing in the movie.
The hierarchy of it.
Yeah, the hierarchy of it I don't really understand. And my only problem is, for some reason, this movie, maybe it's just because of his prominence at the time, but Rami Malek's character is underused. Just so much that I don't, and this is more so for characters for me, but when it comes to like the world revolves entirely around Grace Mason and then some of the characters in the unit, not necessarily everyone.
Specifically Marcus and Jaden, and to some extent the American flag kid, which I forgot his name.
Well, he's obviously the most unusual case. So they bring him in early on and to close out the movie as like he is that catalyst to kick off the movie and to set an example of like what this movie is basically going to be about.
Yeah, and you get that character's name is Sammy, and then you get the Louise character who's primarily.
Oh, you're right. His name is Sammy.
Yeah, the character Louise is primarily there to be kind of antagonistic towards
Marcus, especially, yeah,
and kind of bring out different emotions in Marcus.
When you get that he's competitive, but he's also that kind of like formative year thing where, I mean, right. When I was in 6th grade or 7th grade, which I think is the age of Luis at this time, I was kind of a dick. So
right. Yeah, they're very, once again, going into the character writing, I think they capture the ages of the characters well within that as well.
But the world reminds me of that Futurama episode where Philip J. Fry goes into his memories, and as he opens the door to his house, it just becomes white. Because, of course, he didn't have a memory of that day, so he would have nothing to point to. It feels like the world in this instance is like 2 locations, Grace's house and the unit itself, and then everything around it doesn't exist. Right. In a way, I think that can be compelling. I don't think it's a strength for the setup of the movie. And I'm not saying it's a 0, but I do think it is just a 1.
Okay, I think I'd go 2, but I can go with you to a 1 here. I think personally, for me, I'm just going to lay my cards out. You know, I love this film. I think this is this is my favorite film from the year it came out. And frankly, if it came out this year, it would have been my favorite film this year. That's how strong I think this film is. So I personally would be really high on the scoring here. That being said, I'm probably, like, if I were rating this just on my own, this is a 10 out of 10 for me. Like, this is the kind of movie that I live for. So I have to, you know, once again, I'm accepting that your perspective is 50% of this.
My perspective is probably between 60 and 70% of that. So I would be between a 6 and a 7 out of 10.
I'm saying 50% of the show's perspective is coming from you. So I'm fully willing to take my personal feelings about it and set it aside a little bit, because I understand that there are some things that can be argued objectively about the film.
Right, but what I did say was true, though. I would still put this between a 6 and a 7 out of 10, which is quite high on my ranking of things.
Right.
So it's well above average. Right. So the only thing I'm fighting a little bit for is simply just that I don't think this is nearly for everyone.
That's true. If you haven't, like, if this kind of independent filmmaking isn't your thing as much, then this isn't gonna be your thing. You know?
This came across, and maybe because it just came across this way when I watched it the first time, but this came across as very preachy. I'm not saying it is preachy. I'm not saying the intent was preachy, but it's very easy to like see this and see it as like a very pretentious thing. But
I don't see it that way at all, but I understand what you're saying.
That's my point. I'm not saying that everyone's going to think this is preachy, or even that it is preachy. I'm saying it's easy to understand that it might be. Or if somebody thought, wow, this movie is just so overrated, I don't understand why people like this movie, I'd be like, I understand you. I don't agree with you, but I get it. Yeah, it's just not for everyone.
I think this movie might be a little too underseen to be overrated.
I think when I say overrated, I mean of the people who have seen it.
Right, I understand. Yeah.
When movies are overrated and underrated, you can use different metrics. Is it overrated in the sense that too many people watched it, or is it overrated in the sense that it's talked about too much, or is it overrated in the sense that of the people who see it, they rank it too highly? I wouldn't say it's overrated. Right. I would just say that I could easily see how somebody would see it that way.
Right. If you watched it in the year 2013 when it was getting all of that festival hype, maybe you could watch it and be like, yeah, it's just fine,
Yeah. Like, I'm going to be honest, when like things are festival darlings, but don't really like kick off in the mainstream and everyone's angry at like the public for not liking something that only people who can go to festivals will like, then that gets a little bit preachy. Yeah. Not saying the movie is like that, but I'm saying the festival goers who are like, why don't the public just go to festivals every single day? And it's like, because people can't do that.
Right. Right. Yeah. And this movie, like, it had that kind of thing at around in 2013, around when it was premiering at this stuff. It just kind of lost all steam because it didn't really hit any of the awards bodies come the end of the year. I think it might have even won for best editing or something at the Independent Spirit Awards. But yeah, it didn't really get anything outside of some independence focused awards. It
feels like, especially for movies made in the US, that in order to get nominations or respect from awards, you kind of have to be more mainstream than this.
Right.
Like way more mainstream. Yeah. This absolutely, I could see a few nominations for this movie from the Academy Awards, and I wouldn't like bat an eye, especially for Brie Larson's acting in this one, especially over like probably, I mean, this came out in 2013. I know Sandra Bullock was nominated for Gravity. I'm not saying she does a bad job, but Brie Larson does a better job than Sandra Bullock in Gravity for acting specifically. So
yeah,
as like there could be names that could be replaced for names of people in this one, but
it's just the kind of thing
it's not going to happen.
I think the point I'm making is that because a movie like this, a movie of this kind of caliber in terms of its quality, of what it's presenting, but it's so small in its scale and in its independent like resources, that the only way it's going to hit kind of a zeitgeist kind of thing is if it gets more attention at these like awards kind of things, like the Academy Awards, I think this movie's good enough to be in that conversation, and you will get like one or two indie movies a year that end up making it to that extent, things that are really small that end up getting there with it. So this just didn't happen to get there with it. And then I think because of that, it just didn't stay in the minds of people over the years. And it's been kind of forgotten and I think pretty well overlooked. And I think it's worth revisiting if you've never seen it or if you haven't seen it in a long time. I think it's worth checking out.
Or if you completely forgot it existed and scoffed at the name of the movie because it didn't make sense to you.
You're like, 3 words together, that's strange.
3 words together, that's strange. Well, it happens more often every year, but especially because we run out of ideas and we can't plagiarize other people's titles, so eventually every word will be used as a title for something, probably.
Yeah.
But where were we?
We were
going on to characters. Yeah. So, as I said, I think there are some characters that are overlooked. I do think that the heavy hitters of Marcus, Jaden, Grace, and Mason are too much to give it less than a 2.
Yes, I agree. I think the Remy Malek character, I think he's
And the
obviously
Jessica
that.
character, I have no idea why she's there except to just be like a talking
It would be
point.
weird if you didn't have another counselor there. And I think that that's kind of what her presence is. She's not a major
Sure.
role or anything. And the Rami
Well, she
Malek
was basically
character,
the receptionist, no?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of, but she also helps out. But
Well, she was working the front desk. I mean, people in reception can definitely help out
right,
depending on what the job is.
there's just points where they, like, the other characters have to leave to take care of something else, whether it's a kid running or something else, and you have to have enough people working there to have these people be able to do this thing, and then somebody else still be able to stay behind to, like, watch the other kids. That's kind of her role in the movie, is to be
Basically,
the
yeah.
person, just be another person physically there. She just doesn't get as much focus. But
Yeah.
and then the Rami Malek character, I think they use him to introduce you to everything and kind of get you to understand certain things in key scenes, particularly like the opening and the scene where he's introducing himself to the kids. You get kind of that feeling it out kind of thing going on. You also get a pretty funny bit with his character where he's told just say no to everything because they're gonna trample you if you don't, basically.
Yeah.
And then he says no to jump roping, and then the Stephanie Beatriz character is like, not that. Like, you can say yes to that.
Right.
And then you have the scene where Jaden's like closing herself in a room and she doesn't have locks on her doors because she's a cutter. And you get him like dealing with like having to restrain this person, and she spits in his face. You know, he's not used throughout the movie, but he gives a different perspective on those things rather than just being the people who wouldn't have any reaction to these things happening. He gives reactions to those scenes.
Yeah, he comes off to me as the grounded character that's for the audience. It's
Right.
like you're reacting the same way that Nate is in all these situations. The absurdity of it and everything like that.
I kind of prefer the audience character being a side character in something like this rather than being the main character, because I don't know, I prefer being with the characters who have been through it for the most part and are in a more emotionally complex place than the person who is putting themselves here because they're curious and they're interested in doing this kind of work.
I see what you're saying, but I guess it's just less of a preference, more of like less of a preference of like the grounded character needs to be the main character or the side character. I would just say if they're characterized well, that's good enough for me.
Yeah, I will say though, he's characterized well enough, and I do agree that he gets some sidelined. Like, he gets sidelined to some extent.
I think it's just weird because in every single poster and everything like that, Rami Malek is like the second character after Brie Larson's character.
I will say a lot of those posters,
which is weird.
A lot of those posters came out after the fact, like in promotional material for like after he like won an Oscar and became a more prominent presence in Hollywood.
Yeah, it's like Short Term 12 with 2 Academy Award winners. And it's like, yeah, but this was the stepping stone.
All of the original posters feature Brie Larson and John Gallagher Jr. very heavily, and then Rami Malek is just a part of the cast. But in the more recent promotional material that you might see on like Amazon or something, if you're renting it, you definitely get Brie Larson and Rami Malek, because John Gallagher Jr., while he's had a consistent and strong career, has not had the same presence in the zeitgeist. So I understand why they would make that pivot from a marketing perspective. Especially since, like I said, the only thing that somebody might have watched this movie for nowadays is if they probably saw somebody that they recognized, and so they slapped the most recognizable
just the jumping off point for most of the big names of the last decade.
But the character wise, I agree. Like, those main other characters that you're focusing on are really strong, too strong, I think, to put it anything less than a 2. Particularly, just bringing up the Marcus character again, like, there's some really great stuff with that character and his own kind of exploration of his life. And there's one particular scene with John Gallagher Jr. after Marcus
the rap scene.
Yeah, Marcus gets in trouble because he was during the baseball game, and he hit him with the bat. He hit Luis with the bat.
He hit Luis with the bat after Luis was chirping.
Right. And he was also stashing some weed in his mattress, and she found it during the strip down scene for like the stripping the rooms. And so he was in trouble, but because these people, that's where some of the tenderhearted stuff and heartwarming aspects come from, is that these people really understand these kids, and they respect these kids and they love these kids. And so instead of like being overly punitive with him in like having multiple things happen, he sits down with them and he lets him pull out his um his rap lyrics, and he just starts playing the drums with them so he can have
A
something to
bongo.
rap with. Yeah, he plays a bongo with him, and it's such a good scene. And there's so many
He plays
little
a bongo
scenes like
because Marcus can't have bong, yo. Hey.
but Lakeith Stanfield wrote that rap that he did for the movie, which I mean, it's good. And then the ending closing credits song also is a rap that Lakeith Stanfield does. But that there's lots of little scenes like that with the characters, and it's such a character focused movie. Yeah, it's a 2.
I mean, previously to Short Term 12, I think that was Lakeith Stanfield's main joy and hobby was music. So
I mean, I would believe it. It makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think Cretton and Stanfield were just basically the music writers for this one. So
yeah, because Cretton, I think he was the composer for the short film, and he didn't compose the feature film, but the score elements from the short film are definitely carried over into the feature film.
Well, it's understandable why he's the composer for the short film. I mean, if it's his music thesis film, it's not like this is Spielberg turning in Schindler's List. So,
right. No,
which is a hilarious fun fact. Like, how do you grade Schindler's List? You know about that, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. All right. So the next category is directing. Destin Daniel Cretton has gone on, and I think he's proven that he is one of the better, like, I would still say up and coming, although he's becoming more established, directors out there. We'll see if he gets lost in the Marvel thing, or if he's able to use that as a launching pad to do even bigger and better things.
It's not like Shang-Chi was one of the worst ones to come out of
that's
series 4. What are we on now? Act 5 now?
Yeah. Shang-Chi is like one of the shining lights of like the last number of years of Marvel films, for sure. And with some of the best action scenes of maybe any Marvel movie too. So I really enjoyed Shang-Chi quite a bit. But I think he does a really great job here. And I think the personal aspect of the film really comes through in this one. And For me, I'd give this a 2, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on it.
So for directing, I can't deny, especially for like, you continuously pick movies that are debuts for directors. And yeah, I think we kind of have given a curve to directors' first time debut films. I'd say if we were doing one of his other movies like Shang-Chi, I don't think I would give directing a 2 for that one.
I agree.
But for this one, I'd say, yeah, sure, it's a 2.
Yeah, especially given the scope of everything. And like, I've seen so many independent films, and this one just feels more polished, more well thought out and put together. So they just, because I've seen films on this same scale dealing with similar types of subject matter, and the presentation here is just so personal feeling that I think that, and his filmmaking is, like I said, I think it was a good idea for this not to be his actual debut, to be his second feature that he did. So he had a little bit more understanding of the medium, I think, by the time he did this, and that paid off. I think something like Shang-Chi, though, you get the combination where it's never just the director with an MCU film. It's rare when the director makes a true stamp in one of those films. And I think he does a very good job at handling it. But I also
arguably probably Iron Man was the only Guardians of the Galaxy. Probably
I might even give Thor Ragnarok a specific kind of directorial flavor to it as well.
Sure, but only because something had to change with Thor's franchise.
Right. But so they gave him more leeway with it, though. And then he got more leeway with the following one, and it didn't pan out quite as well.
Yeah.
But either way, like Shang-Chi, I don't think is like a standout. Like, you don't really get the full stamp of it, but he does handle what he's doing really well there. This is all him. And so that's where I give it an edge over something that he did do well later, but I think the scale here, he works really well with it.
Sure.
Acting.
It is a 2.
Yeah,
because
a resounding 2.
we've harped on it a little bit.
Yes. It's a resounding 2. The performances are all excellent here.
That's the one I feel the strongest
same,
for, almost
among
certainly.
everything that I love about this movie, the acting is perhaps its strongest quality.
Yeah.
Visuals, okay. I think we are on complete opposite ends of the visuals because of the whole handheld situation. So yeah. I love the visual presentation here. You found it to be the worst aspect of the film.
Can't stand it. It's one of the reasons why I probably will never watch the movie again.
So for that sake, I guess we just meet in the middle and put it out of 1.
I think, yeah, that's kind of the situation we're in.
Yep.
It would seem we have reached an impasse.
It honestly makes it pretty easy to score visuals in this situation.
Yeah, exactly.
And we talked about it off the top, so we don't need to talk about it anymore.
Nope.
Let's see, editing. I think the editing here is really tremendous, and part of why the emotion works so well in it. It, like I said, it did. I looked it up, but now I'm doubting myself because I have chronic self-doubt. But I got 1 second. Let me just.
Yes, it won 2014 Independent Spirit Awards Best Editing.
Yes, which, yeah, like, it's no Oscar, but that's a very credible organization.
It's probably, it's probably 3rd in my view.
For independent films specifically, like, there are things that are always going to get highlighted there that never even are going to have a shot at the Oscars just because they don't have the money or the promotional backing to have a shot at the Oscars. So as far as independent film goes, that's kind of like as credible of an organization as you're going to get. And they always do a fun thing where they have their awards ceremony happen the night before the Oscars in a big tent to kind of have a contrast with like the pageantry of the Oscars. But it's always fun. And it's a good awards show, honestly. They always get good talent there because, you know, big actors love to do independent projects because you get more flexibility in what kind of performances you get to do. So,
sure.
But that being said, I think the editing is one of the movie's stronger aspects. So I'd give it a 2.
Yeah, I won't budge that much on it, simply because I think it's definitely a 1. I just didn't feel that strongly that it was outstanding editing.
Okay, so. I felt the editing really contributed to the emotional weight of it, and also like the pacing.
I'll agree that was with the emotional part of it, and I could see that, but it just didn't hit me in the same way it hit you, I guess.
Right, I understand that. So, yep. All right, next category is sound. So I'm wondering what you think about the sound. I think the sound is generally really well presented, and I really love the score. It's a very simplistic score that this is where it may or may not work for you because it might feel a little too indie in it because it's mostly just kind of plucking at strings, you know, but like in a way that is, I think, contributes to some of the quiet emotion of this film that works really well. But what do you think about it?
I don't know that when it comes to movies that feel very indie like this movie, it's tough to nail down a score. I would say the rap is really good, and especially the one in the middle of the movie, but I don't feel that strongly about the score. It's the same. It's probably a little bit, as I always say, for me, music tends to be the thing that gets the most emotion out of me.
Right.
So if we're looking at it from my perspective, it would be, I didn't feel very much for the movie, probably due to what I've already harped about with the shot selection and the score not really doing much for me. I'm not going to say it's bad.
Yeah, I'm fine going to a 1 with sound in this situation. Yeah. Once again, it's one of those things, I found the score really effective for me, and then the other sound is all well done. But yeah, it's not one that I can like really argue for a 2 as other than just like a personal feeling about it.
Yeah.
So next category is genre. Not quite sure exactly.
I don't think we've brought up a lot of contemporaries.
Yeah.
And that's mostly because it's kind of merging together that kind of coming of age plus like a short stint of a...
I guess would you call this a contemporary drama then? Like, is that what we would categorize it as?
It's definitely one of those, like, this movie was made by late Gen Xers, early millennials, as like, this is how we view this type of section of society.
Right.
Like I brought up to you the way back, 8th grade is kind of like that in a way.
Yeah.
In a way, this feels like, and it's not just because both of them were short films, this feels to me a little bit like Whiplash. The genre is completely different, but the scope of the plot is kind of is very similar in that it's just focusing on Miles Teller's character and his relationship with Fletcher.
Right.
There's not really an antagonist. I guess Fletcher could be an antagonist, just like in the way there's not really an antagonist in this movie. There's like scene antagonists like Luis and Jaden's father, but there's not really much in the way of like an antagonist for the movie. Or
the antagonist exists in the past in this film, and now it's just dealing with the trauma of that and trying to figure out how to move on with your life.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. The antagonist is trauma, and it's an intangible thing. So it's not really something that you can talk about without it being completely from experience to experience. It's not something that's seen easily to the audience. So
yeah, this is a low stakes contemporary drama, but that's like because it's hard to just call it just a drama for the sake of how we usually do genre stuff on this show, because that's so far reaching, you know?
Yeah.
Are we talking about, you know, something like this, or we could be talking about like Mystic River or something?
It's one, I mean, is the Deer Hunter a drama? Yeah, kind of. So would you put it in, it's not really the same category as this, even though it harps on like something to do with mental illness, but it's completely different.
Yeah.
But it's got some similarities with things like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Girl Interrupted. And it's got some of that coming of age things that I've said before, 8th grade and the way back. So it's got contemporaries, but not many of them merge genres like this do.
Yeah, this just it's got that independent quality to it where its focus is very small in scope, and it's just trying to explore that scope as intimately as it can within the limitations of that.
Oddly enough, if the genre is just straight up drama, I'd put it as a 1.
Right, but I kind of agree with you that it doesn't quite just fit as a drama just in the broad grand scheme of what drama is. So, but I don't know how to necessarily qualify it, you know, like, is it like 21st century independent drama?
I would say it's not a feel-good movie to me, but one of those millennial feel-good movies where it's a specific type of look at what our generation or the generation just before us decided to make movies about. It's kind of a weird thing. Have you seen the movie Son of Rambo?
No.
Okay, Son of Rambo is an equally independent... It's got Will Poulter, the dude from We Are the Millers and
Guardians 3.
Yep, Guardians 3. It's that kind of like coming of age, like idealistic setting for like childhood in a way. And I haven't seen that movie in a while since it came out, really, but I thought a lot of that film and this film for no other reason than it's kind of got that same kind of scale. It's very low stakes. Son of Rambo would just be a 1 when it comes to that type of genre. It's not as good as this, but I wouldn't necessarily say that whatever this is going for, I think I've seen better, even if I can't put my finger on it at this moment. That's all I'll say on it.
I feel pretty strongly that this movie accomplishes extremely well what it's going for. I don't quite know how to exactly describe in terms of like filmic genres of what that could be described as specifically, other than just, like I said, a contemporary independent drama, you know?
Yeah.
And in that capacity, I think it exceeds very, like, exceptionally. So I would give it a 2 for I would personally give it a 2 for genre, just because I think it really succeeds at what it's going for.
Yeah, it just pains me that we've never looked at like genre as like a, well, we have, but we haven't looked at it through like the eyes of, or the lens of an intended audience. Because something like Darkman, which, what did we give Darkman on this? Probably like a 1 or something like that.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
If we're looking at it through the intended audience is essentially people who like Sam Raimi-isms, and he does that perfectly. So it's odd to swap what we think of genre as throughout these episodes.
I think it's just hard to place. I don't think we've just done a straight up drama before, where it's completely.
We have done straight up comedies though. And that's technically the other side, but
right. But just where it's like completely grounded in our world, and it's dealing with complex characters and themes that are completely, just within the world as we know it. It's not trying to present any kind of special flourishes or anything like that. There's not a historical angle to this. There's not big production, anything like that. It's just completely stripped down in what it's able to present. And that's kind of a uniquely independent thing, honestly. Like at least in the modern age, you don't really get that in a lot of big studio filmmaking anymore.
Yeah.
Usually you get blended genre stuff going on, but in independent world, you get a lot of these types of dramas, which is why I'm tempted to say it's an indie drama. Because I do think that there is a plethora of those on a scale of good to great, and bad.
Yeah,
and I think
that's
within
limiting
that world,
this, though, because as much as we keep saying, "Oh, it's indie, indie isn't really like. To me, I was about to say it's not like a movie making style outside of just low budget, which doesn't really decide what the filmmaking needs to be. It just limits the scope of what it has to be. So,
right,
calling something indie doesn't feel right for this one, even though it may seem like it because it's low budget.
And it feels that way. It feels like when you tell somebody what an indie drama is, that's what this kind of feels like. But I also understand. I agree with you completely. Maybe it's just the fault of trying to categorize things, and
well, because things blur way too often. I mean, we've given examples of movies that are kind of like this, but only in certain ways. That this doesn't really have a genre. So if we're just in that case, if it's truly like in our eyes genreless, we kind of have to go with is there an intended audience that believes this movie to be one of the best at what it's doing? And I'd say yeah. So that's how I'll get to it too, with whatever this category is now.
I agree. Because even if using Darkman and me loving Darkman as an example, I love that movie, but within its intended genre, I don't think that movie's a 2 still.
Well, it depends on what we define as intended audience, because if the intended audience is like a comic book pulpy action movie, it's probably pretty good. But
yes, I still like it. I still think it's good for that genre. That's a whole other thing. But yeah, I think I'm satisfied with that. But impact is our final category.
I know it did make money, but this movie has movie is completely gone.
Right. I would say this movie has a 1 for impact, not because of anything financial that it did, but because 1, it did win the top prize at the South by Southwest Film Festival, which is one of the more significant film festivals stateside for sure. And also, the cast in particular, and Destin Daniel Cretton going on to have the careers that they have, I think that this movie has had a major influence there. So in that capacity, I think that this movie...
it's an unseen influence. Yeah.
Right. It's had ripples, but it's definitely not a 2. So,
yeah, I think that's fair.
Oops, I put 2 times.
Whoa, hold on there. Slow your roll, bitch. Was that 16 out of 20?
Yeah, 16 out of 20.
That puts it in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre category.
Yep. Which, I mean, I wasn't expecting to watch this again and to feel as strongly as I did about it. I knew I really liked it the first time, like I said. I just didn't remember exactly why. And rewatching it, I remember every reason why. And it impacted me again. So
yeah, it's kind of odd that both of us had our neither of us changed our views technically, because I was apathetic towards it when it came out, and I'm still pretty like, it's all right, but it's just not something that I'll think about too much, because as I said, I've seen this done many, many times. And maybe it's just
for me, this one's just like, a very meaningful and well done version of this type.
Maybe it's just the type of movies that I watch, or it's just the type of TV shows that I watch where this kind of drama I've seen before. But it's like it's just one of those things that I'm desensitized to that type of stuff. Or maybe it's honestly just the way that I grew up and what I've seen. So
you were exposed to a lot more types of films at a young age.
Yeah.
So than your average kid. So.
True.
Yeah, but that wraps up our discussion on Short Term 12. Yeah, 16 out of 20, like we said. It's a great film. If you haven't checked it out, I would check it out. Just know what it is, like it's not something big or flashy. It's a very small, stripped down little movie.
And the thing that I always say is check out a movie, even if you don't think you'll like it. Check it out. If you like it, great. If you don't, there are people who feel like you.
Right.
That's all I'll say.
Yeah, art is very subjective, so there's all sorts of opinions out there. But yeah, that does it for that conversation. But we have another movie next week, and I don't know what it is, and I would like to know what it is.
So I'm going to create a game. I'm going to create a game where once every, it's not going to be like once a month or anywhere close to once a month, but every now and then I will pick a random movie generator and generate a random movie for us to watch next.
Yeah.
And you're going to be the man who guesses to see okay, that's way out of the blue. That's not something that you wanted to pick or wanted to pick because you had something to talk about. So I went to a random movie generator website. I picked any decade, any genre, one film. I was not going to get a second chance at this.
All right.
And the movie that that RN Jesus wants us to talk about is Yes Man 2008.
Yes Man. Okay, well, here we go. We're talking about Yes Man.
Yes, for reasons that I can't explain.
Yeah, I will say I'm going a different direction than you, where I think that Short Term 12 for me on my end of things is probably the last contemporary film. And by contemporary, I mean anything that came out
within the last 20 years, probably.
Yeah, I'm going to say I'm going to start focusing on a lot more classics, stuff that came out pre 1970 even. Because that's kind of where we've touched the least, and there's so much rich film history, and I'd love excuses to go back and watch some that I haven't seen in a while, or even the plethora of classic films that I've never seen. So that's kind of the direction that I'll be going in my picks going forward for however long I feel like doing that for. But yeah, Yes Man is a movie that I definitely have seen a number of times.
Same. I haven't seen it a number of times, and in fact, I haven't seen it in probably a decade and a half.
We had it on DVD, so it was family friendly enough. There's that weird scene at the end of the movie.
I was about to say, isn't there a scene where Jim Carrey gets a blowjob from a grandmother?
Yes,
okay.
It's that PG-13 kind of comedy still, though, that it's not too explicit. And there's also that scene at the end of the movie. We'll get into it when we talk about it next week
there is
on Great American Movie Review.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you for joining us this week on Great American Movie Review. That wraps up this episode. Like I said, you can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you prefer us in the audio format. And yeah, but that'll do it. And we will see you later. See you at the movies. Have a great week. Enjoy your life. Goodbye.